Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Welcome to Just Nicolas Cage, where I very slowly worked my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography, and today I'm talking about the 2011 action horror movie Drive Angry. In Drive Angry, Nick Cage plays a man that breaks out of hell to put a stop to a Satanist cult leader that killed his daughter and now plans to sacrifice his granddaughter. Along the way, Nick Cage teams up with a sassy waitress, and fresh on his tail is the devil's assistant who wants to return Nick Cage back to hell. You know that thing that goes around on the internet sometimes where people go, I find this unconventionally attractive thing sexy, but hear me out? Well, I think I have to preface this review with a hear me out, because on paper this movie has a lot going against it. It's got a ridiculous plot, it co-stars Amber Heard and the dad from Twilight, it flopped at the box office, it's sitting at a 47% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's called Drive Angry 3D. But with all that being said, and having seen it twice now, I like this movie, and I'm gonna try to explain why. Firstly, there's a certain context that I think this movie needs to be evaluated within. During the late 2000s and the early 2010s, there was a trend of movies that were an homage to the low-budget B-movies and exploitation films of the 1970s. And I think what kickstarted that trend was 2007's Grindhouse, which I talked about briefly on my channel when I covered Nick Cage playing Fu Manchu in the fake trailer. But a couple of years after Grindhouse, we had the hilarious blaxploitation parody Black Dynamite. A year after that, Machete was released, and the same year Drive Angry came out, we had Hobo with a Shotgun. And I think Drive Angry is attempting something similar to those movies in that it's a throwback to the films of the 70s. Specifically, I think the movie is an homage to 1970s car chase films. Director Patrick Lussier said that he was inspired by The French Connection, Vanishing Point, and Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. But Drive Angry combines that with the vibe of 1970s Satanist movies, like The Devil's Reign, Brotherhood of Satan, and the 1975 road horror movie Race with the Devil that involves both car chases and devil worshippers. In my last video, I criticized the movie Season of the Witch for dipping its feet into B-movie campiness but not fully committing to it. But Drive Angry doesn't just dip its feet into that territory, it skinny dips in it. Because you've got a hokey plot involving Satan and cults, there's cartoonish side characters and a bunch of explosions, and a ton of drinking and smoking and sexing, and sometimes all at once. The feminist in me wants to be somewhat critical of how this movie depicts women. More than one guy in the movie grabs a woman by the throat before kissing her, although at least Cage does it kinda consensually. And also, of course, the camera lingers on Amber Heard's legs and Daisy Dukes in a very Megan Fox and Transformers exploitative feeling kind of way. And usually I would call a movie sleazy for doing that, but I also don't think it would be a true homage to the schlocky films of the 70s and 80s without a bit of blood, bullets, and boobies. And one of the best parts of the movie combines all of those things during the scene where Nick Cage is having sex with a woman while he's fully clothed. Then cue a bunch of goons bursting in trying to kill him, but Cage shoots the shit out of them. He shoots a guy so hard he flies out the window, he shoots this guy's machete so hard it knocks into the guy's own head, and Cage makes sure to take a big ol' swig of Jack Daniels in slow-mo before going back to shooting a guy. And throughout that entire gunfight, he's still having sex with the woman. It's awesome. And I know the movie Shoot 'Em Up did that first, but this movie does it with Nick Cage, so by default I think this movie does it better. Apparently during the filming of this scene, a hot shell casing from one of the blank bullets accidentally flew into Nick Cage's ass crack, but he didn't break character until after the scene ended. Now that's a professional. And the woman that Cage's character is mid-coitus with doesn't even particularly seem fazed by all the gunshots and death, until after the fight's over, where she does seem a bit shaken up.
He killed them while we was fucking. It's never happened to me before. You know, has it ever happened to you?
Have I ever had sex with a guy that was wearing all his clothes and then a gunfight broke out and then the guy killed all the guys while still having sex with me? No, I don't think that ever has happened to me before, no. And there's a bunch of other great action scenes in this movie. And I also got a real kick out of the fact that while some movies try to be subtle and not telegraph it when the object in the movie is just there to cause an explosion, this movie says screw that and introduces a truck carrying a giant container of hydrogen. I wonder if there's an impending massive explosion coming. Spoiler, there is. Now, if you haven't seen this movie before, when you heard my plot summary at the start, you might have expected a whole sequence in this movie where we see Nicolas Cage die, and then go to hell, and then break out of hell, but none of that is really shown in this movie. We get a brief scene at the very start of him driving out of hell, and at the very end we briefly see him drive back in, and that's pretty much it. But we do get to hear a bit about what hell's like. William Fichtner's character describes hell as being like a prison and that the devil is the warden. And he also says that the devil is actually a quiet man that's well read, and he's also not a fan of people sacrificing babies in his name, which I thought was a nice twist. And Nick Cage's character says that the worst part of hell is the video feed where you're forced to watch the suffering of your loved ones. And I do kind of like that the movie leaves us to imagine what that would look like. But if you're not able to imagine what Nick Cage looks like when he's forced to watch horrific video footage, then just watch that scene from 8mm. I did also like that this movie combined a lot of different theologies. William Fichtner says that Jesus, contrary to popular belief, prefers short hair. But at various points in the film, Nick Cage refers to Fichtner as Loki, Baron Samedi, and Anubis, who are figures from Norse, Haitian voodoo, and Egyptian belief. And Fichtner also carries around an obolos coin, which had ties to Greek mythology, and I appreciate those little details. But I do wonder if the decision to not really show hell was born less out of them wanting to leave it up to our imagination, and more out of budgetary constraints. And while there are some practical stunts in this movie that are legitimately impressive, there's also a bunch of what I believe I've referred to on this channel a couple of times before as CGI nonsense, which I do think detracts a little bit from the 1970s vibe this movie is going for. But the goofy CGI didn't really bother me that much here. You know, the bad CGI at the end of Season of the Witch made me go, this is terrible, and I feel bad for everybody involved. But the bad CGI in Drive Angry made me say, whoa, that looks terrible, I love it. And on the topic of the visuals, I need to talk about the 3D. So around about the time that Drive Angry came out, it felt like every movie was in 3D. You'd show up to the cinema to watch a courtroom drama and they'd hand you a pair of 3D glasses. What? And most of the 3D effects in those movies were subtle depth of field style 3D, where you go, oh, that person is kinda in front of that person. And a lot of the time those kinds of movies weren't even shot in 3D, they were just converted to 3D after the fact to make a bit more money. But this movie was marketed as Drive Angry 3D, it was shot in 3D, and the director even said that he's not gonna do, and I quote, one of those shitty post-conversion jobs. And his previous movie, My Bloody Valentine 3D, was also shot in 3D. And like with that movie, the 3D in Drive Angry is the kind of 3D that you wanted to see when you were a kid. You didn't want 3D to make it look like things were slightly in front of other things. You wanted 3D to make it look like shit was gonna fly out the screen and hit you in the face. And Drive Angry certainly throws all sorts of stuff at you. A severed hand, a tire iron, a baseball bat, an axe, a coin, bone fragments, multiple car doors. Even the end credits of this movie smack you in the goddamn face. Now, I don't have a 3D TV at home because I'm not a rich guy from 2010. And I did genuinely think about buying a VR headset so I could watch this movie in 3D for the sake of the review. But I figured it's a lot of money to spend on something that might not even work, and if it did, it would probably be in low resolution. And in the long run, it probably wouldn't be worth it to talk about on a video that only 200 people would watch. But I did watch Drive Angry in 3D in the cinema back in 2011, and even though my memory of it is a bit hazy, I do remember liking the 3D effects for this movie. Rewatching it in 2D, I will say that it's a bit obnoxious and stupid looking to see all that stuff fly at the screen over and over. But like I said, this movie was intended to be experienced in 3D, so I'll let it off. So let's talk about the cast and characters, starting with my bat out of hell Nicolas Cage. Nick Cage's character in the movie is called John Milton, so how can this movie be dumb when it's got literary references like that? Apparently a big reason as to why Nick Cage took this role is because when Cage was working on Season of the Witch, he really wanted them to include a scene where an arrow shoots out his eye, but they wouldn't allow it. But when he met the director of Drive Angry, within the first 10 minutes of their discussion, the director suggested a scene where Cage's character gets his eye blown out by a gun.
And I went, I'm in.
And Nick Cage got his wish, and he gets to rock a pretty gnarly eye wound during the second half of this film, which is pretty cool. Nick Cage's performance here is quite restrained, but it's kind of that Con Air level of restraint, minus the funny accent. You know, where he's in on the joke, but it's kind of better that he plays it straight amidst all the chaos around him. I mean, he's already playing a man with a god gun that broke out of hell. If Cage was dialed up to 11 on top of that, it would have been a bit of a hat on a hat, as they say. So I think it's wise that he doesn't overdo it, and he still gets to have a lot of cool moments. And this movie might have one of my favorite arcs to a Nick Cage character ever. I don't mean the redemption arc of him saving his granddaughter. No, I mean at one point in the movie he says that he wants to drink beer out of Jonah King's skull. And near the end of the movie, after he shoots Jonah King with a god gun, his cup-shaped skull devoid of all flesh conveniently happens to land right next to Cage, and we get to see Nicolas Cage drinking a goddamn beer out of a dead cult leader's skull. And it's moments like that, the gunfight sex scene, and the final shot where Nicolas Cage drives out of hell while a Meatloaf song plays in the background that just makes me go, this movie is rad as hell. But for the third time in a row, this is a movie where a supporting actor steals the show from under Nick Cage. Of course I'm talking about William Fichtner as the accountant, who's undoubtedly arguably the MVP of Drive Angry. William Fichtner is one of those actors who you might not know their name, but you've probably seen him in something like Prison Break. And just like in Prison Break, Fichtner's rocking a sharp suit while trying to track down an escapee by any means necessary. It initially seems like he's the villain, but he's kinda just a guy doing his job. It just so happens that his boss is Satan. He's mostly stoic and unflappable, even when brutally torturing people. But there's also a lot of humor in his deadpan delivery. Fichtner delivers his lines at times like an alien trying to speak English.
You, fat fuck. Some bitch.
And he also gets all the best and funniest lines in the movie.
What's that supposed to mean?
It's a symbol of our pact with Lord Satan.
Pact, huh? Ooh. Funny, he's never mentioned you. Whoa, those are fucked.
And there's loads of other small parts with him that made me laugh. Like the part where he's inside a car that's falling off a bridge and it just cuts to him quietly humming a tune to himself. And of course I adored seeing him jamming in the truck to Casey and the Sunshine Band. But the actual villain in this movie is the southern accented Satan worshipping cult leader played by Billy Burke. And if you think, oh, he can't be that bad of a guy, he uses Cage's character's dead daughter's femur bone as a cane that he beats Nick Cage with at one point, and he tells Amber Heard that he's gonna defile her corpse. But thanks to the way that Billy Burke plays the role, he's the kind of villain that you love to hate, and he's very entertaining with his pseudo-evangelical metaphors and the cool way that he spins his gun. Horror movie legend Tom Atkins plays the police captain, and he's very good here too. I like that in our introduction to him, he's wearing a graphic tee with references to Harry Potter and Donnie Darko tucked into his blue jeans. And there's some really fun moments of him yelling and barking out orders. And Amber Heard is also a big part of this film as a former waitress with a hard-ass attitude that comes along for the ride with Nick Cage. An elephant in the room, there's obviously a lot of controversy surrounding Amber Heard. But here on my channel, I like to separate the art from the artist. After all, this movie isn't about Amber Heard allegedly causing or receiving violence to or from a guy. Well, technically it is, but you know what I mean. But putting all that aside, I thought Amber Heard was legitimately quite good here. She's not playing a particularly demanding role, but I thought she was solid. And even though her character didn't really have much of an arc or really any personal stakes or goal in the adventure, I thought that her and Nick Cage actually had quite a good back and forth together, and she kind of served as a surrogate daughter figure for him. I also appreciated that even the cast members with really small parts made the most of their screen time. Like this cult member lady chewing up the scenery. And this woman whose character is tasked with helping to kill the baby gives a legitimately very emotionally powerful performance, despite the fact that she's only on screen for a couple of minutes, so shout out to that actress. So overall, this movie is a lot of fun. Most of the positive reviews of this movie I've seen have said that Drive Angry isn't good, but it's a good time, and I do understand the hesitation to call something as gratuitous and over the top as this movie good. I suppose it depends on how you define the word good, but I think that if a movie fully achieves what it sets out to do, then it should be considered successful. And this movie sets out to be a fun, balls-to-the-wall romp that's a throwback to the films of the 70s and 80s, full of explosions and sex. So I think in that regard, Drive Angry is pretty good. If you're into that kind of thing, I definitely recommend this movie. Have a couple of beers, preferably served in the skull of a dead cultist, and you'll probably have a good time. So the next movie Nicolas Cage was in was Seeking Justice, so until then, thanks for watching.